We're going to start working toward our final project, and while I know that may sound like a big undertaking, um, I hope that you've already kind of taken a look at it. If you haven't, I'll walk you through it a little bit here, and you can continue to do that. But what is amazing about this assignment is that it is a big one. It is worth a quarter of your final grade, and yet we will be doing this sort of piece by piece, basically every week through the course. So having an understanding of it now is pretty important, which is the purpose of this video. And don't worry too much. If you have questions along the way, I'll try to prepare you as we go, but ask away. Don't wait to the last minute. My biggest advice is to not work ahead, but as you're doing each piece of this project, be thinking about what it needs to look like at the end, so that you're preparing it for that. So when you get to week 6 and 7, as you're trying to pull it all together, you're not writing an entire paper. You're sort of pulling together these pieces that you've made and kind of weaving it together, adding introduction, conclusion, maybe some citations, and really sort of finalizing the formal paper part as opposed to working on concepts and the content itself. That'll all make a lot more sense, but I want to just sort of preface so you know where we're going with this. So you will find in the modules, if you look ahead, week 7, you'll find this project guidelines and rubric. It outlines the project in pretty good detail here. It can be a little confusing, which is what I'm trying to address here in this video, is to hopefully give you a better sense of what this project looks like and what you're responsible for in advance, so that again you can sort of be preparing it as we go and save yourself some work, frankly, on the back end of this. Okay, so before I dive into this, I wanted you to know where this is, and I'll walk you through this a bit. But let me preface the idea here. This project is meant to be a guidebook. You'll see that language through here a bit. What we mean by a guidebook, you'll choose between 3 different scenarios. So you'll see down here, here's the overview. Here you'll see each of the scenarios. Don't worry about the conflict part. We'll get to that in a couple weeks, and I'll explain here a little bit later what that is. But for right now, you're just going to choose your your context. It's a school, it's sort of a personal situation, and there's a little bit of sort of text here about what that is, or workplace. Down below, so there are directions, and then these are the parts that we're going to go through each week, essentially. At the bottom, though, what I want to call your attention to is where it says scenario profiles right here. Under supporting materials, it's right above the rubric, which is going to be important too, so that you can have a sense of how well you've done each of those pieces. But the scenario, that's your job for right now, is first to start out with which of these contexts am I going to choose to write this guidebook about, and I'll come back to guidebook in a second. But if you click on that link, it takes you here. And basically this gives you an extended sort of draft of the context for each of those scenarios. Again, don't worry about it yet, but when we get to it, you're also going to be choosing one of these conflicts. So initially, we're just talking about, in these first module, we're talking about the scenario you've chosen and some broad concepts that we will then apply later. And specifically, we're going to apply it to these conflicts later, but that's going to come in future weeks. If you want to go ahead and think about, okay, which of these conflicts do I want to choose? That's a way to sort of get a sense of where you're going, if that's helpful for you. If it complicates things, don't worry about it. Just stick to the extended scenario part for right now. Basically, you're just choosing between school, personal, and workplace for right now. Okay, so let me go back. So I mentioned the guidebook. It's in here several times, for instance, right here. You can read this overview, and I think that is helpful. But let me be very clear that the guidebook is basically an orientation guide for somebody who is new to whatever the community is. So if it's at school, maybe the setting you're choosing is, there's students involved. Maybe it's for educators. In a business setting, it could be for colleagues who work together internationally or something. Whatever the context is, you are writing an orientation guide or a guidebook, as we'll call it, that you could hand to someone, and it will walk them through the concepts that we're going to be learning about in the course. So you'll want to be providing, as you're writing to your reader, ultimately, you're going to want to provide sort of an explanation, not necessarily a definition, but an explanation of the concept, what we mean, and then also examples from the scenario. So that combination of providing concept and example, sort of concrete example, is a great way for people to learn what you're trying to communicate to them. And again, we're thinking about an audience here who is new. They don't have any knowledge. The knowledge basically that you're gaining in this course, you are passing on to them. So you need to, not make any assumptions about what they might know or sort of allusions to some idea, but to really explain it pretty thoroughly. I think this will become more and more clear as we go, but I want to, again, give you an idea of what this is going to look like in the end so that you can, as you start to write, you can start doing that so you don't have to come back later. What else? Again, these are the scenarios. Directions down here. So like for part 1, for instance, it's a little confusing because we don't do it in week 1, but part 1, social justice. You'll be using information that's in the modules and then explain the difference between describe. What I want to be very clear about is just like in the signposting resources, remember that in college, we're not looking for short answer. We are looking for a real, robust, thorough discussion. So it's less about sort of the what. Don't just give an answer, but explain the how and the why and for whom and all of those other pieces that are important to understand, again, especially in the context of a guidebook, for a reader who doesn't know anything, explaining what these things are. So when it says describe how bias, right, or narratives or whatever, explain what that concept is, give the example, and really give a thorough discussion so that anybody, regardless of their background, can come to that and understand what you were trying to sort of illustrate and also explain to them. What to submit. Down here at the bottom, you'll see submit the template. I'll show you in just a second as a 3 to 5 page Word document. I've had students go beyond 5 pages. That is not a problem. Again, we're looking for thoroughness generally in academic work. Being succinct is one thing, but being too brief is not where you want to be. No sources are required, but I strongly encourage you to do it in this class. Not because I particularly am excited by citations, but because the more you practice it, the more easily you're going to be able to do that in the future. And if you sort of get that out of the way now where it's not a requirement, one, you can get to exemplary that much easier because that helps to go beyond. And you'll be ready to go. It'll be simple and easy for you to do when you get to a class where it is required, where proficient requires it. So please go ahead and practice those skills now. If you have questions, as always, please let me know. It is why I do this. I thoroughly enjoy helping students. So go ahead and ask. Okay. One other piece that's not in here, I don't necessarily expect that for each of these sections, you'll see this in the template here in a moment, each of these sections, so like bias or different narratives, they don't necessarily require a full paragraph each, but okay, but they may. In fact, they probably do. Again, more is more and less is kind of less in this context. So don't be afraid to write a full paragraph, honestly, for most of these things. And if it feels like, these things are sort of the same idea, I need to merge this, that's fine. Do what you need to do, but be thinking, this is probably a paragraph, right? And have that sort of be your default. Okay, so the template, as I mentioned. I also wanted to mention here with the what to submit, this is a paper. The template here, think of this as like a skeleton or a thing that you fill in, right? So it says right here at the top, to complete this template, replace the bracketed text with your own content and remove this note before you submit your paper. It does not mean just delete this highlighted section. It means basically what you see here should be deleted. So you're going to be left with a paper, not this sort of skeleton. But just like in the signposting resources, this is a great tool to help you kind of craft your paper in these places. So below that, where it says identify your chosen scenario, this would be a place where you write a summary of your scenario for your guidebook. Because again, this is a guidebook that you will potentially hand off to someone who's new to your setting. So right at the top, they're not going to have access to the pages that have the summary, so you need to provide a summary of whatever the scenario is in that highlighted section. So that might be a paragraph or two, because you probably want to include some sort of introduction to the guidebook itself, segue into the scenario, and then you can launch into part one. Now, while it is part of this sort of skeleton here, where it says part one, social justice, I would probably, that the stuff in parentheses, complete the section in module 2, I would go ahead and delete that, but keep the part 1, social justice, as a heading, because again, if these 1, 2, 3, and 4 are paragraphs, this will give your reader a sense that these kind of go together. And then when you get to part 2, they'll realize, okay, well, we're shifting gears here. Again, each of these is probably going to be a paragraph, at maybe minimum. That's how this, is this a 2-page document, becomes 5 or 6. Just to give you a sense of what it's going to look like when you're done. So again, signposting resources are incredibly helpful here. Each of these is probably, you're looking at a paragraph roughly. I suggest the headings. You don't have to use them, but I think writing is writing is communication, and the more clear you can be, the better. So that will help with clarity. Just like at the beginning, if you have an introduction, a conclusion with sort of here are the takeaways for your readers of this orientation guide, I think that's incredibly helpful as well, just for clarity. And it's good practice. Most formal papers, you're going to see an introduction and conclusion. And sources, as I mentioned, they're not required, but I strongly encourage you, just keep practicing, whether it's in the discussion boards or if it's a journal or here. Specifically here, you will be talking about things that you learned in the modules. Reference that. If it's from the reading, reference that, and make sure to cite them both in text and here in the sources cited section. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up because I don't want it to be too long, but I hope this is a helpful sort of overview of what this project is going to look like at the end. Students in the past have had, reading this is not quite as clear maybe. So I hope that this video is helpful. If you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to send me an email and ask. We can set up a video call, whatever is most helpful. But I hope that this overview of the guidebook helps. Take care.